Good morning, and welcome to Get Secure with Arrow Security. I'm your host, Mike Blangiforti, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations for Arrow Security. This is our second show, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about workplace violence and shootings. Most notably, as you saw last week, there was a workplace shooting in St. Louis. 3 people were shot to death, and the killer took his own life, making it 4 people that were shot to death in St. Louis. Another disgruntled worker, and another situation that we see similarities time and time again, a lack of regard for human life, a lack of regard for their own life. And this particular person, Ahmed Darir, was the owner of a home health care business, and he was going through a difficult divorce, a history of financial problems, and what's interesting about this particular situation, as I said last week about active shooter and prevention for active shooter, if you see something, say something, and this is applicable in this particular case. And the reason why is one of the former co-workers who was interviewed said that Darir told him 2 or 3 years ago that he was going to kill people. So, and nobody took him seriously. Again, and when we see this type of history. And I spoke at length last week about this. And it's interesting to see that last week's show, that 3 days later, we did have an active shooter scenario resulting in 3 deaths plus the killer. So the question today really is, could lives have been saved? And so for his comments and analysis, I'm actually very pleased to welcome the former Suffolk County Police Department Police Commissioner, Richard Dormer. Commissioner, welcome to Get Secure.
Good morning, Mike, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this.
No, it's my pleasure, and certainly we're fortunate to have you here with your over 40 years experience in law enforcement, just to provide some commentary and analysis of not only this situation, but hopefully in the future when you return, we could be talking about some other current events and help some of our viewers with some crime prevention tips, and and hopefully have a real impact on preventive measures. So Commissioner, just my first question is, can you provide me, the viewers, with your analysis of this particular shooting, and do you believe that it could have been prevented?
Well, as I listened to your opening statement, Mike, and I hearken back to the 90s when Osama bin Laden was telling everybody that he was going to kill Americans. Nobody took him seriously till 9/11. When somebody says they're going to do something, pay attention, believe it, act on it. Don't say it's just somebody blowing off steam, they really can't do it, they don't mean it, that kind of thing. And so when you deal with workplace violence, there's usually indicators in the past that would lead you to know that this may happen. So you should take preventive measures. You've got to pay attention to the people that are expressing these thoughts. And this St. Louis workplace violence incident, he had voiced, I think 3 years ago, to somebody that he was going to kill people and kill himself.
And we see this theme all the time.
Exactly. And so, especially with workplace violence, people are under a lot of pressure today, whether it's personal or business. And when they express these kind of thoughts, it's not a normal type of thing for people to go around saying, I'm going to kill people and I'm going to kill myself. That's abnormal. That's a red flag. And they're up on top of the radar. So we're in the security business, Mike, and Arrow is in the security business. And, we reach out to businesses all the time, offer our services, our analysis, and also security. We have regular security officers or guards. We have armed security. We can do an analysis of your business to determine if there's vulnerabilities. We can do background on your employees. And it's always, and we tell businesses this all the time, it's always an issue when you discharge somebody under, less than favorable conditions. It's a very traumatic event to get fired. to get laid off.
Absolutely.
And so that's where a lot of businesses and business owners, managers, forepersons, they're vulnerable now when somebody is let go, because they can come back to the business with a gun and take revenge on people, that they think have harmed them.
Sure. And again, we see in this situation that a former coworker said he was going to kill people. You think that there's a reluctance of these folks to come forward and just say, hey, this guy's dangerous? Do you think there's a reluctancy because of a former friendship or something like that? And like you said before, that we don't take these people seriously.
No, there is a reluctance to come forward for a lot of reasons. They don't believe it. They don't think it's real. They don't want to get somebody in trouble. They don't want to get involved. Well, that old motto, if you see something or you hear something, say something. So, if they had brought that forward, to the authorities, I know this person that was involved in this shooting was a part owner of that business.
Yes.
So he was an owner. But obviously there were problems, from what I've read in the media and heard in the media, with that business, with the interactions of the employees before that. So this was ongoing. And again, it reached a flashpoint on last Thursday when he went into the business with a weapon, shot 3 people, and then killed himself. All hard-working, it seems like very hard-working people trying to make a living. They're not with us anymore.
Yeah, and it's and the theme that I see when I'm analyzing these shootings, and as you're aware, I'm a former squad commander from the NYPD, and and we've seen an awful lot. We've seen terrible things in our lifetimes. We chose law enforcement, so you see terrible things. The theme that I see in all of these active shooter scenarios, or most of them, whether it's a school, whether it's a place of business, is we see a history of mental illness. We see a complete disregard for human life, including their own. And that's what makes it the problem sometimes, Commissioner, isn't it? That people don't care. If you don't care about your own life, and we see some of these Muslim extremists and stuff like that, and when you don't care about your own life, it makes it much harder for us to prevent these things, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's very true, Mike. And there are a lot of disturbed people out in our communities today that haven't raised to the level of being institutionalized. And so, until they break the law, there's nothing that law enforcement can do about it. But they're out there with issues, personal issues, personality issues, and you never know when they're going to explode. And this is a very difficult situation, not just for businesses, for families that have somebody in their family that's mentally ill, that displays paranoia, that kind of thing. And so you can't just call the police and lock people up. I mean, they have constitutional rights. But you never know when they're going to cross over the line and engage in very violent, as you mentioned, very violent conduct, with guns. And, with the availability of guns today in our society, that's the instrument that is used in a lot of these violent actions.
Now, I remember when I was in the NYPD, and I'm sure it was similar in Suffolk County PD, we had like these early intervention programs, or, and today in corporations, they have these employee awareness programs, they have employee assistance programs to help these folks out. So isn't it incumbent upon family and friends, and whether it's friends and coworkers, to help to steer that person towards some type of assistance, mental health, and certainly incumbent on the family to have, about these sit-downs and these early intervention sit-downs. I believe that it's incumbent upon family and friends that if they see something, to say something. Although much harder, I think we need to create more of an awareness to coworkers, friends, family, that it's not a bad thing to help your friend, coworker, son, daughter.
Yeah, you're hitting on a very important point. There's a stigma attached to mental illness in society, in families. People don't want to address this issue. If they have somebody in their family that's, displaying, inappropriate, behavior, and at which point do you now reach out to professionals And the person that has a mental illness, a lot of times, does not want help. They don't believe that they have a problem. They believe that everybody else around them has a problem. So it's a very difficult situation. In the workplace, you can have somebody that's displaying, signs of mental illness. What do you do about it without infringing on their privacy? And so there's this rub all the time about privacy versus, getting help for somebody.
And that's what disturbs me the most is that I see, me personally, I see that, and not all. By no means I'm saying that all of these incidents could be prevented, but certainly some type of intervention or early intervention and recognition of what people are saying and doing, I do believe could help to at least reduce the number of active shooters. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I should point out that just because somebody is mentally ill or has some kind of emotional issues or problems does not mean they're going to be violent. There are a lot of people that are on medications. They don't go around killing people. This is a small fringe group, and the issue is how do you identify them? It's very, very difficult to identify them. Back to the issue of workplace violence. Businesses can take measures to protect their employees and their business. And that's where security comes in. The regular police, the public police, cannot station themselves at a business. They have other things to do. That's not their role. But private security fills that role. Our security, by the way, will assign security guards to your entrances to make sure that people are not allowed into business, into your company, that are not allowed in there. They will be the gatekeeper.
I mean, arguably, the uniformed security officer is the front line in these situations.
Exactly. They are the police. They are the police presence and the security presence, and they're on the front line. They're the first responder, so to speak. So companies that have issues with layoffs, with people, with workplace violence, domestic or otherwise, and businesses, by the way, are very vulnerable to that. Their employees have issues at home that they bring to the business.
Sure.
And so you have to deal with that as a company owner or as a manager. This is where security comes in. They can prevent an awful lot of this violence or disruption by their presence.
Yeah, and that brings me to one of my other points is that we see in these school shootings that a lot of schools are reluctant to have that uniform presence of a security officer. And you were talking about stigmas before, and the uniform security presence, maybe schools and school districts think will give a negative image to the school that, there's security here, it must be dangerous. Do you kind of think the tide is changing right now?
Well, I think that certainly changed. 10 years ago in the police business, 15 years ago, if the police car parked on the school grounds, you would get a call, the precinct commander would get a call from the principal. Why is the police here? Why is the officer in the parking lot? The officer might just have pulled in the parking lot to do some paperwork. And so really had nothing to do with the school, but it gave the impression that to the principal that we have a problem here, and so parents are going to be upset. That has changed now.
It has.
Yes.
I believe that.
Yeah, because of all the violence in the schools and the issue with the safety of children. When parents send their kids to school every morning, they expect them to be safe. Parents have expected that forever. Schools are safe. Well, not anymore. That shield has been broken, has been penetrated. And so now schools are very much aware that they, must keep the kids safe, the faculty safe, and they've really hardened the security around schools. In the last few years, years ago, Mike, when you and I were on the road doing regular patrol work, schools were wide open. I mean, people could go into the schools, walk in, parents, strangers off the street. That doesn't happen anymore because of this school violence.
And it is disturbing that, and the old saying, something always has to happen before we take action. Yeah. And that's certainly true in this situation. But brings me to my next point. And there's a vigorous debate going on right now. You're aware of it in Congress on this issue of gun control. Now, I'm just curious, what do you believe? I mean, because there's two distinctively polar opposite viewpoints here. One is the efforts that Congress is putting forth right now in trying to get guns off the street and trying to reduce the amount of rounds in a magazine, get rid of some of the automatic weapons like, the AK-47s, and, and is there really a need for the private citizen to have these weapons? Or the other point of view is it better to have law-abiding citizens, law enforcement and formal law enforcement to be armed to help to mitigate some of these things? And Commissioner, two completely different.
Well, let's start with the premise that we're not going to get rid of guns in the United States. So let's put that to rest. The registration of weapons and the people that buy them are going to only impact law-abiding citizens. Mm-hmm. These are the people that follow the laws. Mm-hmm. And so they register, they have identification when they buy a weapon for whatever reason, mm-hmm. for their own protection, for hunting, or they're a collector. I mean, they're going to do that. And these are not the people that law enforcement are concerned with. They're concerned with the bad guys who will get their hands on weapons anyway. Yeah. And they don't register the weapons. The gang members don't register the weapons. In fact, I should mention that in the gangs, the MS-13, the Bloods, the Crips, they have an armorer, just like the military. So if one of their members wants to do a job with a gun, they go to the armorer and they lease the weapon for $100, $150. They go do the piece of work with the weapon, and then they bring it back to the armorer, who now allows it to be leased to another guy. So they have a whole system set up, which is under the radar with law enforcement and with all the laws that are being proposed right now. So we've had laws on the books, especially in New York, very restrictive in New York. Connecticut had very restrictive laws. The weapons, by the way, that were used in Newtown were all legal in Connecticut. And so these weapons are out there. Families have them, individuals have them. Sure. And so they do get into the wrong hands, and they are used inappropriately, unfortunately. But are all the laws that are proposed going to reduce the violence? My estimation, no. I think we have a mental health problem in many communities in the United States, all the way since the 70s, when our mental institutions were closed down, and people that would be in these institutions are now on the streets of our communities. Mm-hmm. This is a major issue throughout the country, how we deal with people that have mental illness. Sure. And we talked about that earlier in the program. We have to address that, where somebody should be institutionalized, hospitalized for a period of time till they get straightened out, and then allow it back into the community like we used to back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But any cop on the street will tell you, and any security officer that's out on our streets in our communities tell you that the biggest issue they deal with is the homeless and the mentally ill. The people that hang around businesses, drinking all day, using drugs, and making it very difficult for normal people to carry on business. Absolutely, and that brings us to the whole other side of the debate. I mean, we do have a Second Amendment in the United States of America. Obviously, there's the whole NRA lobby and what's going on. This whole battle in Congress, and I believe it's important, especially in the United States, to have vigorous debate. I believe in vigorous debate. But here we have a situation where it's really two completely polar opposite viewpoints. One, very restrictive. And it's like you said, that no, you don't believe that being so restrictive on ammunition and magazines and automatic weapons is really going to reduce the violence. No, I don't.
So there is the other side of the aisle that says, hey, we have a Second Amendment. we have law-abiding citizens that have carried guns the history of the United States. Perhaps maybe that is the way to go. And again, you could fall on either side of the aisle, and it's debatable whether one is better than the other. But I would put out there that we do have a Second Amendment. Law-abiding citizens, I believe, have the right to bear arms. And arguably...
Well, the Supreme Court has ruled, and it was a Washington, D.C. case, that a citizen has the right to protect their home, to have a weapon to protect their house, their home. And so that's still, that's still out there, and that's a recent Supreme Court, decision.
Absolutely.
That's where the Second Amendment comes in. So, as I mentioned earlier, Mike, we're not going to get rid of guns in the United States.
I agree.
How we manage the licensing of them is not going to impact the bad guys.
They're still going to get their guns.
They don't register,
right,
as I mentioned, their weapons. And they're going to have access to these weapons from many sources. There are millions and millions of weapons out in the United States. Yeah. I think we have to go after the people that use guns in a criminal way. The penalty's got to be harsh. And by the way, in New York, as you know, the penal law, if you use a weapon in committing a crime, it jacks it up to a higher degree.
Absolutely. The felony goes up.
Well, we got to be pretty strict on that. That when you use a gun in the commission of a crime, you get extra time in prison. No ifs, ands, or buts. No break. You do more time in prison. We got to get the message out there that it's not a good idea to carry a weapon with you when you're out on the street. Recently, I think over the weekend, we had another youngster shot in New York City.
Sure. With
a stray bullet. Okay? Somebody had a gun. And the issue of stop and frisk is a big item in New York.
Oh, that's a whole
that's a whole other issue. But stop and frisk, if done properly, under Terry versus Ohio, the Supreme Court decision, DeBoer, which is the New York Court of Appeals decision. These are the decisions that guide police officers in stop and frisk. And so, I would hate to see the police department in New York City in particular, deprived of that tool to keep guns out of the hands of the bad guys.
No, it was an important component of when I was on patrol and when I was doing investigations, an important component. And the last thing the NYPD needs right now is another oversight committee looking into what they're doing, because you're going to wind up with police officers that are afraid to do their job as opposed to being empowered to do the job that they were sworn to do.
Well, as a former police commissioner, again, at a smaller scale than Ray Kelly is dealing with in New York City, obviously it's an issue of scale, but the police department in New York City, from the commissioner on down, is one of the most professional police organizations in the world. Their talent is unprecedented. And you know that, Mike. You remember that police department. Do they have some issues that they have to deal with? Every police department has issues, especially in the democratic society, that they have to deal with. But their first order of business for a police department, and Ray Kelly says this all the time, is keeping people safe. And guns are a big issue. In minority communities, the moms and the dads who lose their children to gunfire will tell you, we want guns out of the hands of the bad guys.
Absolutely. And we see that time and time again. And certainly, in the future, because I look forward to having you on again, these are things that we're going to talk about, because very interesting dialogue, very interesting discussion, Commissioner. But I just want to change the topic real quick, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about your life after the police department. I did 20 years. I think you doubled me up with close to 40 years, if not 40 years. And I did recognize that, there is life after the police department, but do you miss it?
I do, because it was my life. My number one priority was my family. My second priority was the police business. And you know yourself, you did a long time in the police department. It gets into your DNA. I love police work. I love the idea of catching the bad guys and keeping people safe. And so, you know, after my first stint was 30 years, I went into private business for 11 years, and then I became police commissioner for 8 years. So it was 38 years, and great career. And coming from another country, by the way, as an immigrant,
I mean, tell.
I'm so proud of this country, and so proud of the opportunities that I had as an immigrant, coming from Ireland into this great country. I, you know, bless this country every day. And by the way, I should mention, and to your viewers, I arrived in this country on March 25th. That was the day I landed in this country. I celebrate that as my second birthday. I have a regular birthday, but then I celebrate that as another birthday because the day I came into the United States. But police work, I would recommend it to our youngsters. It's a very, very noble profession.
Rewarding.
Rewarding. And we're not talking about money here. We're talking about service. Service to your community. Service to families. Service to people that, you know, go about their daily lives, don't want to be bothered with the issues of law enforcement and terrorism and homeland security. Leave that to the professionals, the police officers, the detectives, the federal government. They all work together to keep people safe. So
especially now, right? The
yes.
communication between the federal, state, and local law enforcement has, I mean, I would say improved drastically post 9/11.
No, it's unprecedented now. You know, our local police, Nassau, Suffolk, NYPD, we're all in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They meet on a regular basis. They all have top secret clearances. So they hear all the, you know, the terrorism threats, the chatter, as they call it out there. And so they're on top of this. So, you know, we always wanted to reassure the regular folk out there that go about their business every day. The professionals are taking care of you. And I got to commend New York City again. They've done a great job since 9/11, protecting people. And that's because terrorism is one of their #1 priorities every day. And I commend Ray Kelly for the job that he's done with the police department and the officers that walk the streets of New York and Suffolk County and Nassau County every day.
And certainly, I mean, so many departments across the United States should be commended, but certainly the NYPD, because New York is such a terror target, deserves special recognition, and I thank you for that. But Commissioner, time's run out today, but certainly a wonderful discussion. I'm hoping that we could have future discussions to, you know, to help the folks out there, to help continue our police career, but in the private sector, by helping folks with some of these crime prevention tips that we discussed today. So
thank you, Mike. And you know, if anybody, any of your viewers, especially people in business, reach out to Our Security. I picked Our Security, and you did too, because you and I had discussions about this, because it's the #1 security company in the metropolitan area. Designated as #1 in Suffolk County.
Well, we have a great team now.
Yeah, and I'm very proud to become a member of the Our Security team.
As am I. And as we wrap up today, thank you, Commissioner. Really appreciate your time today.
Take care.
So as we wrap up today, I just want to say that we look forward to seeing you on future episodes here of Get Secure. And I want to just give a special thanks to Blue Chip Marketing and the Daily Blue for making this show possible. And so I'm your host, Mike Blangiforti. We look forward to seeing you next week. And remember,